It's the 19th of February of 1945. The cold of December 1944 bit through everything, the wooden walls, the thin blankets, even the breath of those who tried to forget they were still alive. Inside, the camp for German women prisoners in western France, silence ruled every morning. They woke before sunrise, rolled up their straw mattresses, and lined up for the roll call. Their hands were stiff from the cold, their stomachs empty, except for the weak soup that never filled anyone. For months, this routine had been their only rhythm of life. Among them was a young woman named Greta Vogel, whose once bright eyes had grown dim from exhaustion. Before the war, she had worked in a bakery in Berlin. She had baked bread, laughed with customers, and sung quietly while she worked. But now, surrounded by barbed wire and foreign tongues, she felt like a shadow of her former self. She stood quietly in line that morning, her breath making small clouds in the freezing air. The American guards were unusually quiet too. There was no shouting, no orders to clean, no trucks waiting for them to go pick vegetables from the nearby fields. Greta noticed this change, but said nothing. Prisoners didn't ask questions. Then, something unusual happened. One of the guards, a tall man named Sergeant Miller, walked up with a folded piece of paper. He stopped near the fence and read something aloud. His voice carried across the yard, broken slightly by the cold wind. "Attention," he said. "No work detail today. It's Christmas." The women looked at each other in disbelief. Christmas. They had forgotten what day it was. Days had blended together into a blur of hunger and fatigue. Miller continued, "The camp kitchen will serve a special meal at noon. All prisoners will eat inside the hall." Greta felt her chest tighten. A special meal. That could only mean more soup, maybe a few extra potatoes. Yet, even that small thought made her heart beat faster. She hadn't heard the word Christmas spoken kindly since before her capture. Back in their barracks, whispers filled the air. "Do you think they mean real food?" one woman asked. "Maybe they'll just make us clean for them," another muttered. Greta didn't know what to believe. As noon approached, the guards called them to line up. They were led to a large wooden hall, the same place where they usually received rations. But this time, something was different. The smell hit them first. Rich, warm, impossible. It wasn't soup. It was meat. Real roasted meat and fresh bread. Inside, long wooden tables were covered with white sheets. Steam rose from metal trays, filled with food. There were boiled potatoes, beans, even gravy. And at the center of every table stood a small pine branch decorated with paper stars and ribbons, made from scraps of newspaper. For a moment, no one moved. The prisoners stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to believe what they were seeing. Then Miller spoke again, standing near the first table. His tone was firm, but not unkind. "You're not prisoners today," he said. "You're guests. Sit, eat." Greta felt her throat close up. She looked at the faces of the other women. Some were already crying, their hands trembling as they stepped forward. No one had called them guests in years. They sat down carefully, unsure if it was a trick. But when the first spoon touched their lips, reality broke them. Tears ran freely. Some tried to hide their faces. Others whispered silent prayers. Greta couldn't stop herself from crying. She hadn't tasted warm bread in months. She remembered her mother's kitchen in Berlin, the smell of cinnamon and flour, the laughter before the air raids began. An older woman sitting beside her whispered, "It tastes like home." Greta nodded, unable to speak. Across the room, the American soldiers stood watching quietly. They didn't laugh or boast. A few even looked away, as if the women's tears made them uncomfortable. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the soldiers began to hum softly. It was a tune Greta recognized instantly. "Silent Night." Another joined in, then another. Soon, the hall filled with voices. Not loud, not perfect, but sincere. Greta found herself whispering the same song in German. Her voice shook, but she didn't care. Still know it. The languages blended together, English and German, two sides that had spent years trying to destroy each other, now sharing the same melody. The walls that had divided them seemed to fade, if only for that one moment. When the song ended, silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence that had haunted the camp before. This one was softer, filled with something fragile and rare. Sergeant Miller stepped forward again. "No speeches today," he said. "Just remember, it's Christmas. Everyone deserves one day of peace." He left quietly after that, leaving the women to finish their meal. Greta sat there, long after the food was gone, her heart heavier and lighter all at once. For the first time since her capture, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt human. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow. And for the first time in years, she looked up at the sky and smiled. That night, the snow did not stop. By morning, the entire camp was covered in white, the barbed wire, the watchtowers, even the soldiers' boots. It looked like the world had been washed clean, even if only for a little while. Greta awoke early. Her body still felt heavy from the meal the day before, but it was a good heaviness, one that came from warmth instead of hunger. For the first time in months, her stomach didn't ache. Around her, the other women stirred slowly. No one spoke at first. They just lay there, staring at the frost-covered ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the camp generator. Then, from the far end of the barrack, someone whispered, "Was it all real?" Greta smiled faintly. "It was," she said softly. "I can still taste it." The others chuckled quietly. It felt strange to laugh, like breaking a rule they had forgotten existed. But laughter returned easily that morning, as if the warmth from yesterday still lingered in the air. Later, when the guards came for roll call, the atmosphere was different. The soldiers didn't shout. They spoke politely, even offered short nods as the women lined up. It wasn't friendship. It was something subtler, a shared understanding that, for one day, they had all been human. Sergeant Miller stood near the fence, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. When Greta passed, he gave her a small nod. She hesitated, then did something she hadn't dared since arriving. She nodded back. In the afternoon, the women were allowed to gather firewood near the camp's edge. It wasn't much of a privilege, but the snow made everything beautiful. Greta and her friend Hilde, a nurse from Hamburg, walked together, bundled in thin coats. They could see the American guards laughing near the watchtower, throwing snowballs at each other like schoolboys. Hilde smiled. "Do you think they miss their homes too?" "Of course," Greta said. "Everyone does." As they spoke, one of the guards, a young man with freckles, slipped and fell flat in the snow. The women couldn't help but laugh. Even the other soldiers joined in. For a few minutes, there were no sides, no enemies, just people caught in the same winter. Later that day, Miller called for Greta. Her heart raced as she walked to the main hut. She'd done something wrong. She entered carefully, her boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor. Inside, Miller was sitting by a small heater, writing in a notebook. He looked up and motioned for her to sit. "I just wanted to ask," he began, speaking slowly so she could understand, "how the food was yesterday." Greta blinked. She wasn't sure what to say. It was. She paused, searching for the English word. "Good. Very good." Miller nodded, smiling faintly. "You looked like you hadn't eaten in weeks." She lowered her gaze. "We hadn't," he sighed, leaning back. "Poor. Takes too much from everyone." There was a long silence. The crackling of the heater filled the room. Then, Greta said quietly, "Why did you do it?" "The feast." Miller hesitated. "My mother used to say, no one should be hungry on Christmas. I guess I just didn't want to forget that." Greta's eyes glistened. She thought of her own mother, who might be gone now. She didn't know. "She was right," she said softly. Before leaving, Miller reached into his coat and handed her a small paper bag. Inside was a piece of bread and something round, an orange. Greta gasped. She hadn't seen an orange since before the war. "For you," he said simply. "Don't tell the others, or they'll all come asking." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Back in the barracks, she shared the orange with Hilde. The women took small bites, closing their eyes, letting the sweetness melt on their tongues. For a few moments, they were back home in warm kitchens, with laughter and light. That evening, the women gathered near the stove, whispering stories about their families. The fear that had once filled every corner of the camp now felt distant. It wasn't gone, but it had softened. Outside, music played faintly from the American quarters. Someone was playing a harmonica. The tune drifted through the camp like smoke. Greta listened, her eyes on the snowy sky beyond the small window. "Do you think this will ever end?" Tilde asked. "It has to," Greta replied. "It can't snow forever." They laughed quietly, but deep inside, they both knew the truth. Even if the war ended tomorrow, the scars would remain. Still, that night, as the cold pressed against the barrack walls, Greta fell asleep, holding the orange peel close to her face. Its scent reminded her of life beyond fences, beyond orders, beyond fear. And in her dreams, she saw herself walking through a street in Berlin, carrying a basket of bread, the sound of bells ringing through the winter air. For the first time in years, she dreamed not of escape, but of peace. The next morning dawned gray and quiet. The snowfall had stopped, leaving behind a soft white glow that made everything seem dreamlike. The air was bitter, yet inside the women's barrack there was something warm, something new. Tilde sat near the stove, mending her torn sleeve with trembling fingers. Greta watched her, her thoughts drifting back to the day before the meal. The laughter, the orange, and Sergeant Miller's gentle words. It all felt unreal. Could kindness truly exist between enemies? That question stayed with her. Outside, the American soldiers moved slowly, their usual sharp commands replaced by easy chatter. The tension that had always surrounded the camp seemed to have thinned. Even the guards' faces looked softer, as though they too were tired of the endless winter of war. Then came an announcement. A loudspeaker crackled. The interpreter's voice, a harsh German, mixed with American accent, echoed through the air. "Attention! All prisoners are to gather in the main yard at noon." The women exchanged uncertain glances. No one knew what it meant. Was it another inspection, a punishment, or something else entirely? At noon, they gathered, hundreds of thin, pale faces, framed by scarves and frost. The snow beneath their feet crunched softly. The American flag waved lazily above the yard, and in front of it stood several soldiers, including Miller. When the interpreter spoke again, his tone was calm. "The command has decided that for the next 3 days, there will be no work. You will remain in quarters. Food will be provided. It is in the spirit of Christmas." The women froze. Some blinked in disbelief. Others murmured quietly. 3 days without labor, without orders. Greta felt her chest tighten. Around her, Hildy began to cry quietly, her hands over her face. Miller stepped forward, his breath visible in the cold. "We are soldiers," he said in English, his voice steady. "But before that, we are human. Yesterday was Christmas, and even though we fight under different flags today, we all need peace." Weeks passed after Christmas. Snow melted, mud returned, and rumors of Germany's surrender spread through the camp like whispers carried on the wind. The women grew quieter each day. The laughter that Christmas had brought now lingered, only as a memory, a warm, impossible dream. But something within them had changed forever. One morning, the sound of truck engines echoed across the yard. The gates opened, and officers shouted names. Greta's name was among them. She froze, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. When she reached the gate, Sergeant Miller stood there, his uniform cleaner than before, but his eyes weary. "You're going home," he said softly. "The war's ending." Home. The word felt distant, like a song she once knew, but had forgotten how to sing. She nodded, clutching a small bundle of her things, a scarf, a spoon, and the folded sketch he had given her. The women began to climb onto the trucks. Some cried, some smiled weakly. The Americans handed out small rations, bread, chocolate, and water. Simple things. But to the prisoners, they were gifts beyond measure. When it was Greta's turn, Miller stepped closer. He hesitated, then handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note, written in careful, clumsy German. "Greater than war made us enemies, but Christmas made us human again." Her throat tightened. She looked up, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, with trembling hands, she reached through the truck's wooden rails and touched his glove. "Just for a second." "Goodbye," she whispered. "And thank you." He nodded. "Goodbye, Greta." The truck rumbled to life. Snow dusted down from the gray sky, melting as it touched the metal. Greta turned once more, watching the camp disappear behind her. The barbed wire guard towers, the men who had once been symbols of fear but had for a brief moment become something else. Freedom did not feel like joy. It felt like silence, heavy, uncertain. But as the miles passed, Greta unfolded the paper again and looked at the drawing of the farmhouse. She traced the pencil lines gently, smiling faintly through tears. In that moment, she made herself a promise that she would never let hate be the last memory of her youth. When she returned to Germany, years later, the world had changed beyond recognition. But every Christmas, she would take out that fragile piece of paper and place it by the window, next to a single candle. And in that quiet glow, surrounded by the echoes of the past, Greta would whisper a prayer, not for revenge, but for peace. For that was the true gift the Americans had given her, not food, not warmth, but the courage to forgive.